For the camera, my name is Greg Peterson. I am the chairman of the Jamestown Bar Association Memorial Committee. I am calling a special meeting of the Jamestown Bar Association to celebrate the life of Richard Fessenden. The order of the day I will be reading excerpts from the extensive obituary that appeared in the Post-Journal. I have a couple of letters which I will share. I have a video excerpt from an interview I did with Richard a few years ago. And then we'll open it to the extensive, for those who can't see, the extensive turnout here in memory of Richard. First, I would like to pause and just have a moment of silence for somebody some of us knew, Joan Jusko, who passed away. Joan was the longtime secretary to the Honorable William Cass, Jr., and so if we just have a moment of silence, and I thought this would be the appropriate time. Thank you. From the Post-Journal. Richard Hunt Fessenden was born November 30th, Winston Churchill's birthday, in 1946 and passed away on Thursday, September 26, 2024 at the age of 77. Richard was born in Lakewood to Lawrence Fessenden and Georgiana Hunt Fessenden and was a 1964 graduate of Southwestern Central School. He was elected to the board of the New York State Association of Student Councils and was chosen to be on the staff of the summer leadership workshops for several years at the New York State colleges. As a junior in high school, he qualified for the state debate tournament in Albany. Richard received a BA in political science from SUNY Oswego in 1968, attending on a Regents Scholarship. After college, he joined the United States Army Reserve and served from 1969 to 1975. In 1973, he graduated from Syracuse University College of Law. He was a member of the Jamestown and New York State Bar Associations, admitted to practice in New York and the federal practice in the Western District of New York and the Bankruptcy Court for Western District of New York. After graduation, he was associated with the office of Joseph Gerasi, served as a law clerk for the Honorable Joseph Ricotta, and later partnered with Lynn L. Hartley until he was elected, till Judge Hartley was elected as family court judge. Later, he was founding partner in the office of Fessenden, Laumer, and D'Angelo. Richard practiced law for nearly 50 years with an old country general practice focused on assisting clients with a variety of issues. He also served at various times as village attorney for the village of Falconer, associate corporate counsel for the city of Jamestown, with the responsibility of the Jamestown General Hospital, assistant public defender, and counsel for the Jamestown Housing Authority. He received many awards for his pro bono services. Outside of the practice of law, he helped raise 3 children, Daniel Paul England, Elizabeth England White, and Andrew Michael Fessenden. Andrew, here. Thank you for coming, Andrew, you and your wife. Richard is survived by his brother David, Lawrence Fessenden, his children, and his grandchildren. And they are listed in the obituary. There will be a celebration of life, which is planned for Saturday, October 26th, from 1 to 3 at the American Legion in Lakewood, which is tomorrow. I will read a couple of letters I received. To the Memorial Committee of the Jamestown Bar Association, Ray Richard Fessenden, Esquire. I will be out of the area on October 25th and would be remiss if I did not submit a few words for inclusion into the record of proceedings in memory of Richard Fessenden. At the outset, I want to extend my condolences to all members of Richard's family as well as to his colleagues in the law firm of Fessenden, Laumer, and D'Angelo. Dick and I both served in the Chautauqua County Public Defender's Office, and over the years, we would also find ourselves serving together on various Jamestown Bar Association committees. I always respected Dick's knowledge of the law and his ability to articulate it in a way that all could understand. He was the most persuasive at bar meetings in efforts to urge members to vote in favor of a particular motion or cause he felt might be of importance to the profession. Whether at the courthouse in Mayville or at the JBA parties and functions, Dick would go out of his way to say hello and spend time chatting about children, sports, politics, the law, or life in general. He was always most gracious, and his sense of humor could always bring a smile to the faces of those with whom he might be speaking. Veterans Day is next week, and I note that Dick, like so many of his generation, served in the military from 1969 through 1975 as a member of the Army National Guard. I want to say thank you to his family members for Dick's service during a tumultuous time in our country's history. Dick Fessenden was a credit to our legal community, and he will be missed by many, myself included. Respectfully submitted, John K. Plum. Also, another letter. I do appreciate being remembered as a contemporary of Dick's. Although he was 4 years my junior in age, 5 years in Navy Special Warfare delayed my law school attendance and meant that we started practicing in Jamestown at about the same time. 40 years of experience thereafter qualifies me to opine that Richard Fessenden was a stalwart credit to the profession and to certify that he was a consummate gentleman in every personal or professional contact he and I shared. I regret that, to be politically correct, I am now mobility challenged and will not be able to attend the memorial service on Friday. You certainly may share my thoughts about another of the good guys gone, Mark Hampton. Also received a message from the Honorable Stephen Cass, who is en route to Buffalo unexpectedly, and he will be sharing his a letter which will be added to the transcript when we provide that to Jerry Lenicky. I'd like now to pause, and if we could, Ed, we will show a video excerpt of an interview I did with Richard a few years ago. A longer version is on YouTube.
The end of the story is, no, I was not destined to be a lawyer, but I went to SUNY Oswego, first 4-year class of liberal arts graduates there. I studied political science, took some philosophy, and I had a master's in government offer from William and Mary. And I decided to go for the 2-year. It turns out that somebody left a teaching job in Casadega. I was not an education major or nothing about it, but so somebody told me about it, and I knew I could get a deferment for a year, given some time to figure it out. And I went up and taught school there in 1968, 69. You know, I love this area, and one of the things that I was looking for was something that would allow me to stay here and still, you know, make a living, support a family, whatever. So I took the law school admission test. So I did okay, and I got accepted at Syracuse, and left the state of New York and went to Syracuse, and that was that. 73. It was an interesting year. Some nice folks. I mean, Soter, I think, was in that group, and Rennie Perlee, Flowers. At the time, the way I found out if you passed or not, there was a Buffalo legal paper. And you called, and she said, "What's your name?" And you gave it to her, and she said, "Congratulations." And that's how you learned it. And then there were a few people that did go to the pub that afternoon, as I recall.
Yeah, I bet. Did you leave the pub?
Yes. Not enough did I leave it, but I had known Joe Gerasi. His parents lived up the street from my folks. He and Lucian offered me summer clerkship for 2 years. Interesting contrast between Lucian and Joe in terms of just how they practiced and what they did and all those things. So they split up, actually, when I was in law school, and they both offered me positions. But I was a Lakewood kid, so went to work for Joe. But it wasn't too long before county executive became a full-time job. Lynn was practicing, Hartley, and we were friends. So, you know, we got together, and that went on for a while. I mean, if you think about the Wellman building back in those days.
Yeah.
I think Spodos were in there. I think Lyle Heimball was in there. Bruce K. Carpenter was in there. Lynn and I were in there. The surrogate court was across the street in the hotel on the mezzanine.
You became corporation counsel.
Associate. Rick was corporate.
How did that happen? I mean, was it just you guys knew each other and?
I think so.
Yeah.
You know, Mark Hampton had been corporation counsel, and then he left. And Mary Horlacker was the secretary, legal secretary, in that office. And so Rick became corporation counsel, needed an associate. And what I liked about it, I was given the Jamestown General Hospital assignment. Okay. Then I was into public defender work part-time and some other things. I think the general practice was much more common and much more accepted, particularly in a more rural area like ours. Mm-hmm. At the time, there was a beautiful courtroom in the federal building, up second floor. And in those days, the trustees in a case were picked by the judge from the lawyers that were there for court. And I ended up being the trustee in bankruptcy for what became the Nickel Inn. Ended up getting that sold, and you file your paperwork, get paid a couple dollars. You'd have a case, and Spodo would be the trustee. And all you had to have your I's dotted and T's crossed, because he's always looking for people that got treated better than somebody else during a certain period prior to the bankruptcy filing, you know. And I had a case where a guy had a meat market, and he owed me money, so I just go down there and charge some food. So I ended up having to pay Spodo for it.
Really?
Because it was a preference.
Yeah.
Because I was getting paid and somebody else wasn't during that little period of time, yeah. And we always got a good laugh out of that.
We had you with Lynn Hartley, then Lynn did become the family court judge.
Yep.
And then did you by yourself, or did you?
No, I was by myself. I hired Phil Calla at one point. And then Kevin, who's Lynn's half-brother, Walmer, had come down here. And so he and I ended up getting together. And then we went up to, from the Wellman building, went up to 4th Street. And then Chuck D'Angelo was practicing in Washington, D.C. His wife was teaching, and they had a desire to come back to town. So I talked to Chuck. But Kevin didn't know him real well at the time, but we got to know each other, and so we were able to make arrangements. Chuck came back first. He ran a congressional campaign for Stan, I believe, one year. And then joined us, and it's been 30-some years, I think.
Yeah, Fessenden, Walmer, and D'Angelo. But
one of the benefits of doing the criminal practice for a while, sitting in the pre-trial conferences with Lee Town Adams, listening to Lee Town and Bruce K. Argue in Greek. You're doing a hearing, and you take a break, and then you're flipping quarters with the judge against the courthouse wall. Of course, you had to lose. So that was a time-honored tradition. The original picnics here at the Den Halesman's. One of the young guys did pretty much produce the picnic, and everybody else just came and enjoyed it. But it really was a good bonding time. And Judge Alessi, I was trying a case in front of him, and on cross-examination, I was able to get the witness so upset that I got the judge to find the witness, who was a complaining witness, in contempt of court. That was kind of a highlight, you know. Yeah. One of my first cases for Joe was an arbitration, and Arthur N. Bailey was on the other side of it. Okay. And I'm not sure, I don't have post-traumatic stress syndrome from that still about 40 years later. But it was a hell of an experience and a good learning thing. Of course, John Goodell had a long practice, and he'd come barreling into town court on his motorcycle. I think, you know, back in the day, when you came to town like that, you kind of went around and made your manners with some of the offices just to get introduced, and there was a little more formality to that, I think, than there is now. That was very nice. At one point, I was doing an adoption,
Mhm.
and it ended up that the person had to go to an out-of-town hospital, twins. So the birth occurs, and I've got to make the delivery of the two children, and it's wintertime. So I pull up in this hospital, and I go in, and I had a towel, which was thankful at the time for the weather, but so I got this address I got to drive to, and it's snowing, and I got these two newborns in the back seat, and I just kept hoping they'd make enough noise so that I knew they were still alive, you know. But I found a place in spite of the snow on the street signs, and delivered these kids and moved on. But you know, it's one of those things that you just don't think you're going to do as part of practice, but it ended up being doing, you know. So I had one little case for a girl who had just turned 18, and she and her sister came to see me, and their mother had been killed some years ago, before that. And the money had been put in a trust account in a local bank, and the father but it was not to be dispersed without court order from the circuit court. And they went to look for the money, they didn't find it. But I was able to, commit the case, and I was able to get the money back for her. And I told her that this was the last thing her mother could do for her, and I was so happy that I was able to do that. And that was just a little odd case, kind of. It was a nice thing to do.
Mr. Fessenden, what advice would you give me here, as I'm a 28-year-old recent graduate from Syracuse University School of Law? What would you say to me?
Well, be ready to make a lot of changes from your expectations. And number two, I'd ask them if they ever run on a treadmill. Because once you get on the practice, the treadmill starts. And I mean, some people can change or take sabbaticals or do something else and but if you stay here and you're in the practice from 1973 to now, I mean, the treadmill never stops running.
Right.
So you just have to kind of figure out a way to deal with it. The hardest lesson to learn when you start practicing law is how much trouble and time and money it can save you to say no at the beginning of a case. Establish what the client is looking for at the beginning of the matter, and to ask yourself, is this achievable, or is everybody going to be mad at the end of the case no matter what you do?
Yeah.
And that's something that you don't know right away. When you've practiced a while and you look at this area and some of the lawyers we've had, I think, in my opinion, not including myself, I'm just saying as a general rule, the level of practice was actually quite good, and the quality of the lawyers was quite good. There's a lot of personal satisfaction in helping people.
If you notice, his reference to Phil Calla was short. That's part of the edit process. Well, one of the benefits of being the lead named partner of Fessenden, Larmer, and D'Angelo was the fact that there was a business, a very successful business. Everybody from Fessenden, Larmer, and D'Angelo is here, including their alumni staff. And I was told by one of the partners, Chuck D'Angelo, Greg, I know this is the time for reflections and opening it up to all of the members of the audience. Can we go first? Because I got to get people back to work. That's my guy, Chuck D'Angelo. So with that in mind, don't raise your hand right away, but I'll let the folks in the front row have first crack at this.
I'm Kevin Laumer. I asked to go first because I plan on being very short, and I didn't want to interfere in any way whatsoever with Chuck's 2-hour presentation here. But Richard, as you know, was formerly known as Dick, and I still refer to him as Dick, much to his chagrin when he saw me. I first met him through his brother Dave and my brother Lynn. back in the early 70s. Back then, Dave and Richard were known as Muzzy and Fuzzy. And my brother, I hear, is going to explain that to all of you at some point today. In 1979, I think it was, I rented space from Richard as a new lawyer in town. I was working at the public defender's office. And we were at the Wellman building, which was a time-honored place. And it was very unique there. I had a small office in the back. We were only there a short time because Richard had already started plans to move, and we moved over to the 4th and Pine building after that. And from there we moved over to Forest Avenue with Chuck. And it was at Forest Avenue that I stopped yesterday, not because of this, but because of some other matters. And I walked into Richard's office, and I hardly recognized it. It was so clean and neat. And at that point, I was able to see things that I had never seen before. What really struck me was documents that were on the wall that he had framed from the Wright Air Museum, which is something that he had been quietly involved in for many, many years, apparently going back into the 80s. You didn't hear much about it from him, and you never really heard much from him about the other types of things that he was involved in outside the office. He was always quiet about them. He never, created any fanfare about his involvement in various groups or organizations. He was just committed and went about doing those things. At this point, I hope that Richard rests in peace, because he had a difficult last few months. And we all know the tragedies that can bestow someone that has cancer, and unfortunately he suffered through them. And I think that what Greg has done today was very helpful for me and for everybody else to see him again and hear him talk candidly about things in his life that meant a lot to him. So thank you, and I'll pass it along here.
All right. Thank you all for being here. I'll also be brief. I started working at FLD about 11 years ago. It was my first job out of law school, my only job out of law school, really. So what we do at FLD for new attorney is that everybody shadows all the other attorneys for 3 weeks or so. And I never really, like Richard said, in his video, I don't feel like I was destined to be a lawyer. I didn't really know a lot of lawyers. I didn't have a lot of experience within that sort of world. When I was in law school, I had been an intern for a civil defense firm, and the attorneys that were there were very smart. They were very sharp, but they were definitely not what you would think of as warm and fuzzy kind of people. So my first round at FLD was with Richard, and the first day that I was there, we did, excuse me just a sec. We did a bankruptcy consultation, and the folks were so nervous, and they did not feel good about being there to talk to Richard about their financial problems. But he was so nice to them. He was so compassionate, and he just made them feel better. You could see the tension going away from their faces. And when he talked in that video about helping people, I know that was real. And that was very inspiring to me. It was very important to me in how I developed my practice. I also, after Pete Johnson left our firm, I was across the office from Richard. He was right across the hall from me. And he would often poke his head in and see how I was doing. And he would tease me because my office was pretty organized generally, and his, as Kevin said, was not. We had very different styles, and he would tell me he could know how my day was going by what my desk looked like, by whether it was disheveled and there were piles of things. So he would come in and he'd say, oh, it must be a hot day, because I would have books or papers or whatever going on. But he was always, even on those days where everything seems like it was on fire and there were clients that were calling and deadlines, and he was always so calming. He was reassuring. He would always say, take a deep breath. And I really appreciated that. I also just wanted to say that in the last few weeks, I have thought so many times, and I don't know if anybody else is going to talk about this, but about the time that Richard and his crew showed up at the FLD Sports for Kid golf tournament in head-to-toe tie-dye, matching outfits, tie-dyed hats, tie-dyed sweatshirts, tie-dyed pants, everything. They were a riot, and they had so much fun. So thank you all for coming and helping us remember Richard.
I'm Dan Galati, as most of you know. I've been with Fessenden Lawmer D'Angelo for 30 years. Richard was my partner for that period of time. I got to know him back in May of 1994. I was coming back from Albany, New York, and was a very, very difficult time for me. And I got a call one night from, I think it was Richard, it could have been Chuck. George, you know where I'm going with this. And they asked me if I was still in the market looking for a job because I was unemployed. Well, I had practiced in Albany for 10 years and didn't have a job. And I said, sure. I said, I'd be glad to come in. And they said, well, why don't you come down here tonight, right now? All right. So I go down there and I meet with Richard, Kevin, Chuck. And obviously, something significant had happened in the firm that day. I wasn't sure exactly what, but Richard said to me, we'd like you to take over our workers' comp practice. Oh, okay, 10 years of practice, never, ever had I done a workers' comp case. So there was a hearing, day of hearings the next day, and I think there was, I'm not kidding, 7 to 8 to 9 cases on the calendar. And I had never touched a workers' comp file in my life. For those of you who have never done comp, you might realize that it speaks a different language. And there's a lot of code or abbreviations and things like that. The judge who was presiding over the comp court at the time, who became one of my favorite people, but at that time he was very, very difficult to deal with. Richard and I went over to the comp board, and it was down in the city hall chambers where the raised dais is, and the tables would be down below. And I walk in with Richard, and he's sort of guiding me. And meanwhile, everybody else is up on the dais looking at me and microscopically inspecting who is this guy that is just showing up. So, I started that day, and Richard was there with me the whole time. And we made our arguments on cases, and I'm sure it was as difficult for him as it was for me, but he shepherded me through that initial time. And then I remember going back to the office, and Richard gave me a book on workers' comp, and he said, here, read this. I really did. I mean, there were times I would go home, and I would put my head in my hands and say, what have I done? because I was completely out of my element. Well, I'll tell you, I will be forever grateful to Richard and Chuck and Kevin for offering me that position, because here it is 30 years later, over 30 years, and I'm still there. It has been the best time of my professional life, and I'm very, very thankful to Richard for being willing to take a chance on me, because at that time, my life was in chaos, is the only way to put it. And they opened a door for me that really changed everything. So Richard, I will say, he was a very, very private person. And I think you heard some of that from Kevin, from Galena. I practiced with him 30 years, and there were things about him I didn't know till I read the obituary in the paper. I didn't know he was in the Army Reserve. However, despite his, maintaining his privacy, he was one of the most compassionate, caring people that I've ever met. Whenever he would talk, you could tell that he had a special place in his heart for the downtrodden, the underdog, the less privileged. That was Richard Fessenden to a T. That's what he was all about. And he really cared about people. Like he said at the very end of his video here, that he appreciated the opportunity to help people. And that's what it was all about for him. So I will miss him. I enjoyed the 30 years we got to be together. And as Kevin said, I hope he rests in peace. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. I'm Mary Schiller, Fessenden Lombard D'Angelo. Before I start with Richard, I just also want to thank Greg and the Memorial Committee for keeping this tradition going. This is so important. Practicing law is not for the faint of heart, and we all need to be here for each other, and we need to honor each other, and this is just entirely appropriate, and I'm so happy to see everyone here. It really means a lot. So thank you, Greg. I knew Richard for 34 years. I started at the firm in 1990, and as you try to encapsulate and think about what someone meant to you, a lot of things swirl around in your head. And I realized that two things really kind of popped out for me. One is Richard's joy of life, and the other was his empathy. With joy of life, we've already heard a little bit about that and seen that. He just enjoyed the lake. I lived on the north end, he lived on the south end. We'd always talk about what birds we'd see during migration season, what a great sunrise. He just loved that. He loved golf. You heard about his tie-dye golf team. That was a hoot. He was a scuba diver of all things. I mean, the guy would just try things and do things and really embrace life. I remember he was all excited about going to a Grateful Dead concert with his son Andrew. I couldn't believe it. So they get back and he was all excited about it. I had a great time. I found a Jerry Garcia pet head. I don't know if you remember chia pets. They sprout stuff and it looks like hair. I thought, oh, this is great. This is really funny. Richard will love it. Not so much. I realized you don't disrespect Jerry Garcia with Richard. But aside from that, but I think empathy was the thing that really defined him. We've all heard about his kindness, and I looked up empathy in the dictionary, and it is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. I think that's a rare trait. You can't fake it, and Richard definitely had that. It was genuine, and I noticed that the first week I started at Fessenden Lombard D'Angelo. I was nervous, and Richard gave me an assignment. I had to research a family court issue and give him a memo. So I did it, and I was all nervous about, oh my gosh, how was it? Am I going to get fired already? So he gave it back to me a couple days later with a big A+ at the top, and I thought, oh, nice. Calmed me right down. Shortly after that, I was asked to do an estate accounting. And when I did the accounting, I got a little overly carried away, I guess, and I listed the decedent's dog as an asset. Not all partners, Kevin, thought that was a great idea. But Richard said, oh, no, you're just being thorough. He didn't use the word anal or silly or, carried away. Again, just he knew that I was nervous, and he just made me feel better. Galena had talked about Richard's meeting with clients and calming them, and I just have to second that. I sat in on a few meetings with them. You know, people come in, they're distressed, they were humiliated, they felt as though they were failures, and somehow Richard very calmly, by the end of the meeting, had given them back their dignity and their self-respect. He did it every time. And Richard, if I learned to do that half as well as you did, I've accomplished something, and I thank you for showing that to me. On a personal note, when my parents were going through some stuff and I was kind of driving back and forth and taking care of that, Richard would always ask me how I was. And he wouldn't just say it passing by in the hallway. He'd find me in my office, excuse me, he'd sit down and he'd ask me how things were going. And he listened to me. He listened every single time. He gave me advice, he gave me comfort, and he meant it. And that meant the world to me. I mean, he really, truly cared. That was just him. He stepped in, I'm sure Chuck will talk about this, when Chuck had his illness. Dan and Galena and I had no idea what we were going to do with the real estate practice. Richard came in, picked it up, no muss, no fuss. He was gracious, he was a gentleman. And by the way, his real estate knowledge, as many of you know, was extraordinary. One other act of kindness he did with me was I had a cousin who wanted to buy a bunch of gas wells, and I kind of wanted to look like I knew what I was doing, even though I had absolutely no clue. So Richard sat with me for I don't know how many hours, going through literally a stack of title searches. Oh, it was amazing. But that was him. But that also showed me his extraordinary knowledge. He had a lot stored up there. So I guess in some, the one other thing I wanted to mention too, and that I think is why most of our staff is here. Even when Richard was in distress towards the end, he would come into the office because he had things he wanted to finish. He made a point of saying hello and talking to the staff. It meant everything to him. They appreciated it, and that was just the kind of guy he was. He would not leave the office without making sure to say hello to everybody, even when you knew that it wasn't easy for him physically to do that. So, in sum, go Bills, because they better win that damn Super Bowl this year for him. And I'm very proud to have been Richard's friend and colleague for all those years, and I will miss him.
The measure of a man or woman is the relationships they form with other people. And in the audience today, there are people that had very special relationships because they treated Richard with great respect, starting this way and going that way. Andy Robinson, Neil Robinson, Grace Hanlon, George Patabianco, Greg Edwards, Peter Johnson. I got all the lawyers, I think. All of those gentlemen were at the firm, and lady were at the firm at one time or another, and Richard embraced them, they embraced Richard, and if you ask Richard how his run was with these people, he would say it was a great run, because it was. He formed special relationships with the staff across the board. He had a very special relationship with Georgia Anyabeni and Tiffany Anyabeni, who made it their full-time job to watch out for Richard. And as partners in the firm, we appreciate everything you did from start to finish. And I want Andrew and his wife to hear this, because your dad had love every day that he was around the firm. And I'm telling you, to see him come in the last month was just incredible. Mary mentioned about him helping out and plugging in when I got sick. There's only one Richard Fessenden, that's for sure. Richard and Kevin, I got to them by, Richard represented me in a car accident case. I was working for the county and got in a car accident in Charlotte Center, of all things. And I watched him work. They took my deposition. I was the worst witness ever. And he told me that after. He said, I told you not to talk. And he said, well, when he kept asking you those personal questions, I told you before you didn't have to answer those questions. And I said, I subsequently came out of that, 18 years old. I got out of law school, wanted to come back home. And Kevin didn't know me, Richard did from the case. And Kevin and Richard interviewed me, and they asked, well, what can you bring to the firm? And Richard, smiling, because he knew about what I was going to say, he smiled at Kevin and said, I said, I've got 101 first cousins in Jamestown. And Richard couldn't stop laughing while I was looking at, and Kevin responded, make him an offer he can't refuse. I also participated, I'm sure everybody that practiced with Richard that's in the audience overheard some of these conversations he had with a client. And, on the Character and Fitness Committee, I tell the kids I get to interview that it's not what you're doing when everybody's watching you, a judge is watching you, or your partner's watching you. I'm concerned about your ethics when nobody's watching you, nobody's monitoring you. And I walk by the door in the front conference room, people know what I'm talking about, and in that conference room is Richard doing exactly what Mary said. The lady is crying because she's embarrassed by her bankruptcy. What am I going to say to my family? What am I going to say to my neighbors? And Richard explained it the best way he can explain it. He said, the laws are put in place for relief for people that have difficult situations. You had inordinate medical bills. You should not feel sad about that. You should do what corporations do. Understand, ma'am, that corporations have this right to do this too, because it gives you a chance to reorganize your life. I'll never forget that, because he said a lot more than he had to say. It wasn't about lawyering. It was the other part of being a lawyer. He's a good person. Richard's always been a good person that way. He enjoyed working with his colleagues. The Phil Callis of the world will tell you he was a fun guy to have with, and he appreciated who his friendships that he had. Sometimes in the practice of law, things don't look so good, and I was remembering that I was representing an air traffic controller when President Reagan terminated the air traffic controllers. And this gentleman had hired a lawyer in a group, about 100 of them used this lawyer in Florida. He did a hearing en masse, and they lost. My client came to me with exceptional circumstances. He did not get the notice of termination. He was on the thruway. I got receipts that showed that he didn't get the mail that said you either come back to work or you're going to be fired. Under the federal law, you can't strike. I took the case, got started. Actually, I didn't take it. I started to get going on the case. I called the U.S. Attorney, Department of Justice, and I said, look, I'm going to appear now and substitute for the other attorney because I have some special circumstances. Well, the hearing was already done. It was ruled against him, and the basis to appeal, you got to go to the federal circuit, and it's like walking through an eye of a needle. So the attorney from the Department of Justice said to me, Mr. D'Angelo, if you take that case, I'm going to have your license to practice law, because there is no basis on earth for you to bring this case. I'm scared of this shit. So I go to Richard right away, and I said, Richard, she's going to take my license. He said, oh yeah, people threaten that stuff all the time. Just tell her to go to hell, and that you're going to do what you need to do. Well, long story short, it was wonderful to have Richard and Kevin. I mean, they're inseparable. When I started out, let me tell you, they watched me every minute, and Richard's requiring me to learn all the areas of law. You're not going to just do your labor thing, Chuck. You got to learn real estate. You got to learn contracts. You got to learn litigation. You're going to do family law. I didn't want to do divorces. You're doing divorces. Okay. He was right, because to be a good lawyer in a small community, you need to have general understanding of the practice of law. And it's helped me a lot. I have a lot to be thankful for because of Richard Fessenden and my very close friend, Kevin. They brought us the people that are behind me that I think are second to none, and the people that I've practiced with that are here. And a lot of that is because Richard Fessenden was a catalyst to bring solid lawyers into the office. Thank you to all of you, and I love all of you. Thank you very much.
I don't know what's going to happen next with Fessenden, Lawmer, and D'Angelo, whether they're going to leave or whether they're going to actually start billing people. I don't know what's going on, but But nevertheless, that's first. Anybody else who would like to pause and reflect on Richard? While they're thinking about it, Peter's coming up. That mine is biographical sequence of life he talked about, Richard did, about Ledestro and Gerasi, and that he chose to go with Gerasi and Lakewood. But he ended up being the successor to Lucian as the attorney for the village of Falconer. And I, in turn, followed Richard as the attorney for the village of Falconer, and have continued to do so for like 47 years. So there's a kind of a sequence there. Peter?
Well, and I saw Lynn's hand start to go up, so I was going to defer to him, but I'll let you go next, Lynn. So my name is Pete Johnson. I had the privilege of working with Richard for 14 years at Fessenden, Lombard, and D'Angelo. And as Galena mentioned, I got to have the office right across the hallway from him. And he would do that. He would pop in all the time, and it was always a pleasant thing. He usually had some sort of obscure question, and then it would often turn into like a research project. And, you know, the idea that's already been expressed even through the interview about him being a general practitioner, Richard would take on any case imaginable. Anything that struck his interest, he would do it, and he would research it. I would sometimes help with that research. And he was, frankly, in my mind, fearless. He would just, I can remember him doing some litigation about ERISA, and I didn't even know what ERISA was. I didn't know it was an area of law at all. And so, you know, just subject after subject, he was fearless in his willingness to go learn something new and then do it at a high level. And I really respect that. I'm just going to tell one story. I have a bunch. I told one to Andrew. Maybe I'll save that one for tomorrow's event. But I'm going to tell one story. I remember this had to be about 15 years ago. And it was prior to your ability to like look something up really on the phone in terms of legal research. And it was a Sunday night. It was probably about 8 o'clock, and I got a call from Richard. And he said, "Pete, I need your help." And I said, "Oh, okay, what's going on?" And he said, "I need to know exactly what the law is relative to a search and seizure of a trailer without sufficient probable cause and no warrant." I was like, "Wow, okay, well, that sounds like an interesting question. We'll have to, you know, what are the facts?" And he started telling me some of the facts. And again, it's Sunday night. So I said, "Well, you know, tomorrow morning, you know, I'll come in a little early. We'll see if we can figure this out and we can do some research." And he's like, "Well, no, I kind of need to know right now." And I was like, "Okay, well, you know, again, tell me more about it." And he said, "Well, I already took the position." I said, "You took the position of what?" "I took the position that they need a warrant. And I need to hear from you that that's right." And I said, well, where are you? Are you at the office? Are you trying to figure this out?" He said, "No, I'm at the scene. I'm here with the troopers." And I told him, they need a warrant. And that story just always has stuck with me, because what had happened was he got a call from a client on a Sunday, and he goes to the scene to defend what was going on and make sure that everything was done right. He waited there with the troopers and the people involved, and they never came up with a warrant. And so it was a success in a certain way. But I'll never forget, that was the kind of representation that Richard would bring to every client. He's willing on a Sunday night to go to the scene of the... I was a little worried about him becoming a witness, but it never came to pass. But that's Richard Fessenden.
Hello, my name is Lynn Hartley. I think some of you have heard that name this morning. I thought about what I wanted to say about Richard. A lot of that has already been said. And I'm glad that Andy is here, because I want to say some things that most of you probably weren't even around when Richard and I first met. And I mean, you weren't born. Richard and I met somewhere between 1966 and 1968. And it's that broad a period for a couple of reasons, but one of which I was working here for a couple of summers. And I don't believe that I had met Richard then, but when I did, I find out that we literally we could probably skip stones down the lake at each of our houses away from each other. We both lived up in Sherman's Bay and outside of Lakewood. That's where his parents' home was, and he lived there for many years. And my grandparents' home, which I eventually purchased from them, was in a little closer to the village. In fact, I think, the third house outside of the village of Lakewood. That almost became an issue, but that's in time for another story. Richard, when I first met him, I came to know him as fuzzy. And Richard was always fuzzy to those of us who were around. Well, soon came to my attention that no, that's wrong. He's not fuzzy. His older brother David is fuzzy. He was muzzy. And that is the history of that. And very, very big difference, and you were made known of that. But before I forget, I do want to mention that our secretary for many years, Sheila Raystrick, who was unable to be here today, did want to mention her best wishes, and very sorry that she couldn't be here, and thought very much of Richard also, the times that we were together. Richard and I, we didn't really come to know each other practicing law like all the rest of you did. Richard and I, we used to ski on our water skis in the summer and on our snow skis in the winter. We would go to Eagle Ridge. Oh, some of you will remember where that was, up north of Mayville. And in the mornings, on the weekends, we'd go out on Chautauqua Lake about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. You want to see a beautiful sight, go out and see Chautauqua Lake that time of day. And it's like glass. And if you want to water ski, that's the time to water ski. And Richard and I, we did it a lot. And it was a lot of fun. And those are the things that I remember about Richard. I was surprised at one thing on the film that you showed. He did refer to Kevin as my half-brother. That word is not in this family's lexicon. Never has been and never will be. But Richard was a lot of fun, a very hard worker, and someone that I will not forget, and that I am very thankful that I had the opportunity to know and to be with and to help him get started in his wonderful career. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is George Panabianco, and I had the great fortune to be the first associate at Fessenden, Lawmer, D'Angelo. And my great fortune is because I couldn't think of three better men to learn the practice of law about. The combination of Chuck and Kevin and Dick, and I call him Dick too, Kevin. And I drive him crazy when I would call him Dick. The lessons that I learned there during my time there are invaluable and changed the trajectory of my career. And you have to understand about Chuck at that time. Chuck is very demanding. He expected the highest quality for every single client. And he reminded you of that daily. And so one of the blessings I had with Dick was that he would sort of soften Chuck's blow. Every day I would get a memo, there'd be something in my box, and it would just say, "See me immediately." And I'd take it and I'd walk into Dick's office and go, "Chuck wants to talk to me again." "No, don't worry, George, it'll be okay." 2 days later, "See me immediately." And the worst ones were you couldn't read Chuck's writing. So you didn't know what the hell he was saying. And you were scared to death. And I was scared to death every day I walked into that office. And so I would constantly go to Kevin and to Dick and go, "What do I do now?" The best was always when some lady would meet Chuck at a grocery store and give him 1/10 of the story. And then you'd get that memo, "See me immediately." And so I think Dick constantly would go to Chuck and say, "Leave the kid alone. He's going to do okay." But I'll tell you one quick story. And the comment that's been made 5 times or more today was how compassionate he was, how empathetic he was, how calm he was. He was very, and I could never get that because I'm closer to Chuck's side than to Dick's side. But he was always calm, and nothing ever seemed to get him ruffled. Even when the first case that I had handled was Judge Hartley's case over a property dispute and a variance in Lakewood that, oh, by the way, I probably screwed up, okay? And Dick was so understanding and so calm, and he was a mentor without sitting down and telling you he was your mentor, and he really was. And I have to tell you this story just because it's going to drive Kevin and Chuck crazy. You've seen their building. They got the most beautiful building in the city of Jamestown. It's gorgeous, and everybody loved it, and Kevin went out of his way to make sure that it was gorgeous and it was decorated. And one day at 5 o'clock, Chuck is leaving, and Dick's leaving, and Kevin's leaving. And a buddy of mine shows up with a big truck. And in this big truck, he's got this credenza. Now, my office was this little tiny office. It was probably 8 by 10. And Dan, you'll remember the credenza because it was still there. So the office was maybe 8 by 10. And this credenza was like 11 feet long. And there was no way this credenza was going to fit into that room. But my buddies said, "Yeah, it'll fit. So 3 or 4 of my buddies and me, as Chuck and Kevin were walking out, are going, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, we're going to bring this in. I'm going to use this credenza because it fell off a truck. So we're going to put this credenza in my little tiny office." And Kevin's like, "No, George, don't do it." I said, "No, don't do it." And they all leave. And us 5 guys try to take this credenza up those winding stairs. And we destroyed those stairs and the walls, gouges in the walls, gouges in the wallpaper. We get it on top of the stairs, and we can't get it into the room. So they take apart this old door frame, the beautiful woodwork. They take apart the door frame, and we stuff this thing in. And then I sat there and I just sweated for 2 days going, when Kevin and Chuck and Dick come into this building and they see the damage that I did to this beautiful building, I'm fired. They're gonna fire me. And Kevin and Chuck were ready to kill me. They were so mad, and we just completely damaged. I mean, I tried to get like nail polish and take this beautiful wallpaper, try to fix it, and it was just a tragedy. And Dick goes, "It's going to be okay." And he just kept reassuring me, "It's going to be okay." And I'm sure he went and talked to him, and I'm sure he probably saved my job that day because I destroyed those walls. And I never forgot that. And every time I would see him, that was sort of the message that I got was, it's going to be okay. Well, this case got messed up, it's going to be okay. we'll solve the problem. Well, this turn went the wrong way. It's going to be okay. We're going to go solve the problem. And we would do it together as a group. Whether you called Chuck in or you called, somehow it was going to be okay. So I never really had any worries because he had confidence that we as a group were going to solve the problem. And that's just how he was. It was that calming influence. And the only other thing I'm just going to say before I step down, which is, we talked about the Bills, but he was also a Cleveland fan. And I used to needle him to death over the Cleveland Indians. So I feel bad that he passed before the Yankees finally took the Cleveland Guardians out, because I would have tortured him about it. God bless Richard Fessenden. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andy Robinson. I had the honor and privilege of working with Richard at Fessenden, Lawmer, and D'Angelo for 9 years. In case you haven't picked up on a theme yet, Richard was cooler than the other side of the pillow. I cannot tell you how many times he talked me off the ledge, and it sounds like he did the same thing for so many of us in this room. He was unbelievable, and just his presence was very calming, his demeanor. Every time I thought something horrible was going on, it was the end of the world, he took me aside and calmed me down. My office was right across from him. I did real estate with him. I learned an awful lot from him, and I'm going to miss him. Richard was a great friend, a great person, a great attorney. I grew up in Lakewood. My grandparents had a house that was probably a block or so from Richard. I knew Andy when we were kids. We went to school together and used to run around the neighborhood and get into trouble. But I knew of Richard. I didn't know him until I came to Fessenden, Lawmer, and D'Angelo in 2013, and I learned then what a wonderful person he was and what a great attorney. So sometimes I've been known to stop at the American Legion in Lakewood on a Friday afternoon to meet up with my dad and his buddies, and Richard would often pop in. And he always put a smile on my face. I always sat down and I had a beverage with him, and we spoke about things, and I noticed he had stopped coming, and he was ill the last few months, and that really saddened me, and I'm going to miss Richard, and I appreciate the time that I had with him. I'll always cherish that. Thank you.
Good afternoon now. My name is Grace Hanlon, and I was an associate at FLD from 1995 until 2005. And I'm just going to tell one story because I think everybody has really told everything about Dick. I still call him Dick too. But in the spring of 1997, my mother got very sick. She subsequently died, and I was very close to my mother. And FLD, Kevin and Chuck and Richard were very kind. They said, go to Buffalo and spend the time while my mother was in the hospital with my mother. And I was able to do that. Well, one Saturday or Sunday, I was also new and I was stressed. I had a ton of work and I wanted to get it done. I drove from Buffalo on a Saturday afternoon late, or a Sunday afternoon, I can't remember, to the office to try to get work done. And my desk was covered in stuff, and I turned on the radio, I was listening to music, and I was just trying to get through the piles. And Dick showed up. And I don't know if he showed up because he was just driving past and he stopped and he saw my car, I have no idea. But he shows up and two things happen. One, like everybody said, he took my level of stress from here and knocked it way down. And he started to go through the piles on my desk with me and started to say, it's more important that you're in Buffalo than you're here. Let me take care of this. I'll delegate this. This isn't a big deal. And the second thing that happened is that a Grateful Dead song came on the radio, and I was amazed he knew the words. And then we started talking about going to Dead concerts. So that Saturday or Sunday afternoon, in a very difficult period of my life, Dick was who he always was a very kind, compassionate, hardworking, good lawyer. And I'll always remember him for that. And God bless Dick. Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak? If not, I will adjourn today's special celebration of life of Richard Fessenden, and we will have this transcribed by Jerry Leneke, who's agreed to do that and to make it available to the family. And I must tell you, Andrew, that we don't get crowds like this. This is an extraordinary turnout of attorneys, staff, people, and it's an exclusive fraternity here. So they've come out en masse in honor of and memory of your dad to celebrate his life. With that, we stand adjourned. Thank you for coming.